Dad's silent revenge.
I won $15 million in the lottery but didn't tell anyone. My son said, "Dad, when are you finally moving out of our house?" I quietly got up from the table and left. The next morning, I bought their dream house, but not for them. Good evening, folks. My name is Howard Eugene Daniels, and I'm 67 years old. I want to tell you about the night my son asked me when I was planning to leave his home and how $15 million changed everything that came after. Let me start from the beginning because you need to understand how I got to that dinner table in the first place. 2 years ago, my wife Martha passed away from a heart attack while watering her tomatoes in our backyard in Tucson. We'd been married 46 years. I'm a retired Air Force staff sergeant and aircraft mechanic, and Martha was a nurse. We had a good life together in our little house with the yellow kitchen and the workshop in the garage where I fixed neighbors' lawnmowers for beer money. After Martha's funeral, my son Norman stood in that yellow kitchen and said, "Dad, you can't stay here alone. Come live with us in Phoenix." I looked around at the walls Martha had painted, at the garden we'd planted together, at our wedding photo on the refrigerator, and I said yes. Maybe I should have asked more questions. Norman's house in Phoenix was nice enough. 4 bedrooms, pool in the back, 3-car garage in a quiet suburb. His wife Janet had decorated it in what she called contemporary style. Everything was white and gray with expensive furniture that looked like nobody was supposed to actually sit on it. It was clean, it was also not mine. They gave me the guest room at the end of the hallway, small window that looked out at the neighbor's fence. I was told not to move anything around or hang any of my Air Force photos on the walls. Janet said it would mess up the aesthetic flow of the house. Those first months, I tried to make myself useful. I fixed the garbage disposal when it broke. I helped 13-year-old Stanley with his math homework. I drove 10-year-old Gloria to her violin lessons when Janet was busy. I kept my military habits, made my bed tight enough to bounce a quarter off, kept my space clean, didn't leave my coffee cup in the sink. But here's the thing about living in someone else's house when you're not really wanted there. You start feeling like you're taking up space that belongs to someone else. It creeps up on you slow, like rust on a car bumper. There was the time Janet had her book club over and introduced me to her friends as Norman's father, who's staying with us temporarily. Temporarily, like I was some kind of house guest who'd forgotten to pack his bags. There was the Sunday morning I came downstairs at 8 a.m. to find a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to brunch with the Hendersons, back by 2. There's cereal in the pantry. They'd taken the kids and just left. Didn't even think to ask if I wanted to come along." But the worst was the conversation I overheard in October of that second year. Janet's voice carried down the hallway from their bedroom. "He eats our food, uses our utilities, drives up our electric bill with that space heater, and contributes what exactly? Your father's Social Security and pension should be helping with expenses." I stood in that hallway listening to my daughter-in-law discuss my cost-benefit ratio like I was a business expense. Then I walked back to my room and closed the door real quiet. Look, I'm not going to pretend I was perfect. I questioned myself plenty. Was I in the way? Did I talk too much about the old days in the Air Force? Did I leave the TV too loud when I watched the History Channel? I thought about Martha every single night, about our little house in Tucson, about how she used to bring me coffee in the garage while I worked on engines. But I stayed because Norman was my son. Because after 22 years in the military, you learn that family is supposed to mean something. The lottery ticket was pure chance. I'd stopped at the Circle K on Camelback Road after my doctor's appointment on a Thursday in February. The machine was right there by the register, and I bought one Powerball ticket the way I'd done maybe a dozen times in my life. $5 random numbers, no expectations. I tucked it in my jacket pocket and forgot about it. 4 days later, I'm sitting at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a cup of instant coffee, checking the numbers on my phone. I looked at that ticket, looked at my phone, looked at the ticket again, then I just sat there for about 10 minutes staring at nothing. $15 million. I didn't make a sound. I folded that ticket up and slipped it inside my wallet behind my military ID, and I said nothing to anybody. That was February. The dinner happened in March. It was a Tuesday night. Nothing special about it. Janet had made pork chops and mashed potatoes. Stanley was on his phone like always. Gloria was complaining about some girl at school. Norman was eating fast because he had paperwork to finish for a job site. Jeanette was talking about some client at the bank where she works in loan processing. I was passing the dinner rolls when Norman said it. He didn't even look up from his plate. His voice wasn't mean exactly, just tired in the way you sound when you're saying something you've been thinking about for a long time. "Dad," he said, "when are you actually planning to move out? I mean, what's the plan here?" The whole table went quiet. Janet looked down at her plate. Stanley put his phone down. Gloria stopped mid-sentence about her school drama. I looked at my son. He was 44 years old, getting gray at the temples like I did at his age. He was looking at me like I was a problem he couldn't figure out how to solve. I set down the basket of rolls. I folded my napkin. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "Excuse me," I said, and I walked away from that table. I didn't go to my room. I went outside to the backyard and sat in one of those patio chairs by the covered pool. The Phoenix evening sky was that orange-gray color it gets in winter, and I just breathed for a while. I'm not a man who gets emotional easily. 22 years in the Air Force teaches you to keep your feelings in check, but sitting out there in the cold, I let myself really think about the past 2 years. The staying with us temporarily, the missed brunches, the conversation about my utility costs, and now Norman's voice, flat and tired, asking me what my plan was. I thought about where I'd go. That was the practical question. My house in Tucson had been sold 8 months after I moved to Phoenix. Norman had been the one to suggest it. "Dad, you're not going back there alone. Keeping it empty is just throwing money away." He'd been right, technically. But I'd sat in my truck in that Circle K parking lot and cried for 20 minutes after I signed the papers. The sale had left me with about $240,000 plus my Social Security and Air Force pension. Enough to live on, not enough to buy anything decent in Phoenix. Or so I'd thought. Sitting in that backyard, I ran the numbers with a different variable, $15 million. After federal taxes on the lump sum, I'd looked it up on my phone the week before. I'd walk away with about $9 million, $9 million. The number was so big it didn't feel real. I sat outside for over an hour. When I came back in, the dishes were cleaned up and everyone had gone to their rooms. Nobody knocked on my door that night. No "Dad, are you okay?" No apology, just silence. I lay awake until 3 a.m. doing the most important planning of my life. The fear hit me first, I'll be honest. I was scared of being alone at 67, scared of making mistakes with money I'd never dreamed of having, scared of what it would mean to go against my own son. But then I remembered something my old crew chief used to say when I was a young airman working on F-16s. Daniels, he'd say, being scared is useful for about 5 minutes. After that, it's just an excuse to quit. I thought about what I'd actually seen the past 2 years. Not what I'd told myself, not the excuses I'd made for them, but the actual evidence. Janet talking about my cost-benefit ratio. Norman asking when I was leaving without a hint of regret in his voice. The way both of them watched me get up from that dinner table and said nothing. I reached for the notepad I kept on the nightstand and started writing. Not thoughts or feelings, but a mission plan. Step 1, don't tell anyone in this house about the lottery. Not one word. Step 2, claim the prize through a lawyer before anyone knows. Step 3, get financially independent without Norman's knowledge. Step 4, find my own place. I looked at that list for a while. It looked like something a colder man than me would write. Then I thought about those dinner rolls, how I'd been passing them when my son asked when I was leaving. I circled step 4. I'd spent 46 years building a home with Martha. I'd spent 2 years letting people make me feel like I didn't deserve one. That was over. The next morning, I was up at 6 a.m. like always, military habits, die hard. I showered, put on my good blue shirt and my Air Force tie clip, and came downstairs before anyone else was awake. I made coffee and opened my laptop, a gift from Ruth, my daughter who lives in Oregon and calls me every Sunday like clockwork. I searched for lawyers in Phoenix who specialized in elder law and financial privacy. By the time Janet came clicking down the hallway in her heels at 7:30, I had 3 appointments scheduled. She looked at me like she was surprised I was still there. "Morning," I said. She poured her coffee and left for the bank without another word. The lawyer's name was Patricia Holloway. Her office was in Scottsdale, quiet and professional with good coffee, and no TV blaring in the waiting room. When I was shown in, she stood up, shook my hand with a firm grip, and said, "Mr. Daniels, you mentioned on the phone this was sensitive. What can I do for you?" I told her everything. The lottery ticket, the amount, the family situation, the dinner conversation. I laid it out like a military briefing, facts, timeline, no emotions. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "First question," she said. "Have you told anyone, signed anything with the Lottery Commission?" "No, ma'am. Haven't told a soul." "Good. Arizona allows lottery winners to claim through a trust, which keeps your name out of the public records. We'll set that up before you claim. I also need to recommend a financial advisor. I work with 2 who specialize in sudden wealth situations." She said this like helping 67-year-old veterans secretly manage lottery fortunes was just another Tuesday for her. I left her office 2 hours later with a folder of documents and a referral to a financial advisor named Nelson Freeman. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I'd done something for myself instead of around myself. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. I met with Nelson, who was patient and smart and never once made me feel stupid for asking basic questions. We set up the trust under the name H.E. Daniel Holdings, my initials and Martha's maiden name. The lottery claim went through quietly, the money routed to an account at a different bank across town. At home, I kept to my normal routine. Same breakfast, same TV shows, same quiet evenings, but I was different inside. When you stop trying to be invisible, things change. Janet noticed first. She had a talent for noticing things that might affect her. She said something to Norman on a Thursday evening, and I heard it from the hallway. Those walls weren't built for privacy. Your father's been going out more. I saw papers in his truck. Legal-looking stuff, a pause. Then Norman, probably just getting his affairs in order. Updating his will or something. My affairs were in order all right. More than they knew. Norman asked me about it the next morning over coffee. Real casual, like he'd just thought of it. Dad, everything okay? Janet mentioned you've had some appointments. I looked at my son over my coffee cup. His face was open, concerned. But underneath the concern, I saw something else, something watchful. Just taking care of some paperwork, I said. You know how it is at my age. Always something to update. He nodded and let it go. But that evening I noticed Janet left her laptop open on the kitchen counter in a way that seemed accidental but wasn't. I also noticed that the folder I kept locked in my room had been moved about half an inch to the left. Someone had tried to get into my business. I sat on my bed looking at that folder for a long time. Then I drove to a FedEx office, made copies of everything inside, and sent them to Patricia's office for safekeeping. The house hunt started that weekend. I'd already been talking to a real estate agent named Alice Thompson, someone who worked a different part of town from Janet's territory. I'd been careful about that. There was one house that stuck in my mind from the first time Alice showed me the listing online. 4 bedrooms, sunroom facing east, big yard, detached garage perfect for a workshop. The kind of house that looked like it was waiting for someone to come home. When I made the offer, full asking price, cash through the trust, Alice called me from her car an hour later. Howard, they accepted. We close in 30 days. I stood in the parking lot of the hardware store where I'd been buying screws to fix their loose kitchen cabinet, and I let those words sink in. Mine. I hadn't felt that word apply to a place since Tucson. The closing was set for the second week of March. I said nothing at home. I kept being the quiet man in the guest room who helped with homework and fixed what was broken. But real estate transactions leave footprints. Janet found out through a neighbor who knew both my agent and someone in Janet's professional network. Small world in the Phoenix real estate game. She came to my room on a Saturday morning. Didn't knock. I was at my small desk reading when she opened the door. Janet didn't waste time with pleasantries. You bought a house, she said. I turned from my desk. I was wearing my reading glasses and the cardigan Ruth had sent me for Christmas. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was 41 years old and used to getting answers when she asked questions. I've been looking for a place, I said. A 4-bedroom house on Elm Street. Cash transaction through something called H.E. Daniel Holdings. She crossed her arms. Where did the money come from, Howard? I have savings. Norman and I went over your finances after Martha passed. You had enough to live on, not enough to buy a house in this market. I noticed she said Norman, and I went over your finances like my money was a household budget item they managed together. Things change, I said. Her eyes got narrow. She was doing math in her head, and I watched her do it. Did you get an inheritance? Some account we didn't know about. I took my reading glasses off and set them on the desk. Janet, I said, is there a reason you feel entitled to know my personal financial business? The temperature in that room dropped about 20 degrees. She was quiet for just the right amount of time. The silence of someone changing tactics. We've supported you for 2 years, Howard. We took you in when you had nowhere to go. I think we deserve some transparency there. It was. Took you in. Like I was some charity case instead of a man who'd been paying for groceries and fixing their broken appliances for 2 years. You've been very generous, I said. My voice stayed level. And I'm grateful. I'll be out of your house within the month. I turned back to my desk. She didn't leave. If you've come into money, she said, and now her voice had an edge like a blade. Norman is your son. He's your heir. He has a right to know. I have a lawyer and a financial advisor, I said without turning around, both very competent. Howard. Her voice got sharper. If you're hiding assets and something happens to you, it creates legal complications for this family, for Norman. I set down my pen. I've thought about everything very carefully, I said. Thank you. She left. The door closed harder than she'd opened it. I sat at my desk and my hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From the effort of staying calm when every part of me wanted to stand up and say all the things I hadn't said for 2 years. Norman came to my room that evening. He sat on the edge of the guest bed and looked at his hands. Janet's upset, he said. I noticed, Dad. He looked up. Is there something going on that we should know about financially? He paused. I know what I said at dinner was. I could have said it better. I'm sorry about that, but this feels like you're being secretive, and it's making us worried. Worried. That was the word he chose. I looked at my son. I thought about the 8-year-old who'd helped me change the oil in my pickup truck. I thought about the 20-year-old who'd called from college to tell me he'd gotten his engineering degree. I thought about the 44-year-old who'd asked when I was leaving without looking up from his plate. "You don't need to worry about me," I said quietly. "I'm going to be fine." He waited. When I said nothing more, he nodded and left. 3 days later, I drove to Elm Street and sat in my truck outside the house for 30 minutes. The yard had mature trees. The garage was big enough for a proper workshop. I thought Martha would have loved the sunroom. I drove home and slept better than I had in 2 years. The atmosphere in that house changed completely the Monday after Norman's visit to my room. Suddenly, Janet was making breakfast again, something that hadn't happened since my first week there 2 years ago. She was wearing her good earrings and her professional smile. "Morning, Howard," she said. "Have a seat. Eggs are almost ready." I sat down. Stanley looked up from his phone with a confused expression, like he could sense the weather had changed. Gloria hummed something under her breath. The breakfast was good. I said so because it was true. Over the next week, I got invited on errands. Janet asked my opinion on things. Norman started coming home for dinner more often and directed conversation my way. Stanley brought me a bag of the peppermint candies I'd mentioned liking once about 6 months ago. Gloria showed me her violin practice. It was a well-executed campaign. I recognized it because I'd spent 22 years in the military watching people negotiate when they wanted something. They wanted to know about the money. They wanted to position themselves before I left. And if they could make me feel guilty enough, or grateful enough, or loved enough, maybe I'd reconsider the house, the lawyer, all of it. I wasn't cold to them. I want to be clear about that. I was present and pleasant. I thanked Janet for breakfast. I talked with Norman about work. I ate Stanley's candy, but I didn't tell them anything. The closing was set for Thursday of that week. The movers were scheduled for Saturday. I was 1 week away from having my own front door key. It was Wednesday when they came to my room together. Both of them. I heard the footsteps in the hallway before the knock. I was packing my Air Force photos when Norman opened the door. Janet stood behind him, which wasn't her usual style. She liked to lead. "Can we come in?" Norman asked. Of course, they sat on the edge of the guest bed side by side. I took the desk chair. Janet spoke first. "Howard, we want to start by saying we're sorry, both of us. The way things have been, especially that dinner conversation, it was wrong." She looked at Norman. "It was," he said. He met my eyes and I could see he meant it, at least partly. "Dad, I don't want you to leave like this. I don't want things to be like this between us." I waited. "We've been thinking," Janet continued, and her voice shifted from warm to careful, "that maybe everything's happened too fast. You found a house, you're packing, but it doesn't have to be this way." She paused. "If you need more space here, we could convert the study. Or if you want your own place, we could help you look as a family. We know the market. We could make sure you end up somewhere safe and appropriate." Safe and appropriate. She wanted control over the transaction. "We just feel," Norman said more quietly, "that handling all this alone with lawyers we've never met, financial advisors, Dad, that's a lot to manage by yourself. We want to help. We're family." I looked at my son, then at Janet. I thought about the folder moved half an inch to the left. I thought about "took you in." I thought about Janet's voice through the bedroom wall talking about my cost-benefit ratio. "I appreciate what you're saying," I said. "Both of you," Janet leaned forward. "Howard, if you've come into money, and I think you have, I think something significant has happened. Please don't make decisions in isolation. Norman is your only son. Think about what Martha would have wanted. There it was, using Martha's memory as leverage. She'd want you to think about your relationship with your grandchildren. Stanley and Gloria love you. They do love me," I said, "and I love them. That's not going to change. Then why are you doing this alone?" Her voice had an edge now, wrapped in concern. "What has someone told you that made you feel like you need to hide things from us?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Nobody told me anything," I said. I watched and I listened and I drew my own conclusions. I've been doing that for 67 years. I'm pretty good at it. The warmth in Janet's face shifted. Small shift, but I'd been watching her face for 2 years. "You're making a mistake," she said. The performance was peeling back. "Howard, whatever you have, if you're not careful, people will take advantage of you. You'll be a target. We are the people who should be protecting you. Protecting me." I repeated, "Yes." I stood up from the desk chair. I'd been told to stand up straight my whole life, and I'd always listened. "I have a very competent attorney," I said. "I have a financial advisor I trust. I have a daughter who calls me every Sunday and doesn't ask about my bank account. I have a house on a street with good neighbors, and the closing is tomorrow." I looked at both of them. "I'm not a man who needs protecting. I'm a man who needs to be treated with respect. There's a difference." Janet stood up. Her jaw was tight. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said. "I can live with that." Norman looked at me for a long moment, something moving behind his eyes that I couldn't read completely. Then he followed his wife out of the room. The house on Elm Street smelled like fresh paint and something faintly floral from the previous owner's garden. My boxes were stacked in the rooms where they belonged. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe completely. I sent Norman a text that Saturday morning. Moved out today. Room is clean. Thanks for the time I was there. Let's talk soon about getting together. Brief, honest, respectful. He didn't reply for 6 hours. When he did, it was 3 words. Are you okay? I answered, yes. Very much so. 2 weeks later, Norman called to invite me to a family barbecue. Janate's parents would be there, her sister Nancy with her husband, the kids. He presented it as a chance to clear the air. I said yes. I'd been expecting something like this. When I arrived Sunday at 2 p.m., the backyard was set up with tables and Norman was manning the grill. It looked normal. It was designed to look normal. We ate hamburgers and talked about the weather, the kids' spring break plans, Janet's parents' upcoming anniversary. I complimented Norman's grilling and helped Stanley with his baseball glove that had come apart at the seams. Janate let it run for about an hour before she made her move. I want to say something to everyone, she began, addressing the whole gathering like she was making an announcement about Howard. The conversation stopped. Everyone looked at me. Howard has recently made some major financial decisions without consulting his family. We've tried to understand what's happened and he's been secretive about it. She paused. We think he may have received a large inheritance or something similar, and we're concerned he's being taken advantage of by advisors he doesn't really know. The patio went quiet. Janet's parents looked confused. Nancy looked uncomfortable. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Since we're talking about my finances publicly, I said, let me be clear about what happened. I looked around at everyone gathered there. In February, I won $15 million in a lottery. After taxes, that's about $9 million. I let that sink in for a moment. I hired a lawyer and a financial advisor before I told anyone because I wanted to protect myself. I bought a house because I wanted my own place after 2 years of being treated like a temporary guest. I looked directly at Janet. What I can also tell you is that I overheard conversations about being a financial burden. I found evidence someone had gone through my personal papers. Every bit of kindness shown to me in recent weeks started when it became clear I had legal representation. I folded the paper back up. I love my son and my grandchildren, but I won't organize my life around people who saw me as a problem to manage. I stood up. Norman knows where to find me when he's ready to have an honest conversation. I said goodbye to Janet's parents and the kids, got in my truck and drove to my house on Elm Street, where I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up my workshop in the garage. That was 6 months ago. Norman and I meet for coffee every few weeks now. The conversations are careful but getting better. Stanley and Gloria come by on Saturdays to help in the garden and borrow tools for school projects. Janet and Norman separated in August. I don't feel good about that, but I didn't cause it either. At 67 years old, I wake up every morning in a house that's mine. I have $9 million in the bank, good neighbors, and a workshop full of tools that don't belong to anybody but me. Most importantly, I have my dignity back. That's worth more than any lottery ticket ever printed. You don't wait for other people to hand you a life that feels like your own. You build it yourself, or you spend your whole life waiting for permission that never comes. Respect isn't something you inherit or get handed down through family lines. It's something you earn by how you treat yourself and refuse to let others treat you.